ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump.
Things were good, there was a deal, but I weren't happy. 'Cause it was him who set it up, it had to be crappy. So I sent some planes to bomb the place into the ground. But the nuclear dust just ain't to be found. I was sure that it'd be quick, that's what she said. 132 billion, that was the bill instead. To get us back to where we started before. And I did it all without going to war. We started at square one, dropped the bombs on Iran. I blew 132 billion to get back to square one. To get back to square one. We started at square one. Dropped the bombs on Iran. I blew 132 billion to get back to square one. To get back to square one. To get back to square one. To get back to square one.
There we go. All right, we've had some issues, so we've got. All right, there you go. We've got David joining us in Paris, and we've lost Joe, the creator of that video. But welcome to the shit show. My name's Andrea Edwards.
I'm Dr. David Coe.
And here at the far right, because there's only three of us so far, you have me, Richard Basalato.
And here's Joe.
And there he is.
He's got a dark
Yeah,
studio.
I know. I've lost everything on my studio, but I'm here with the intro at least. So yeah, welcome to the shit show. It's the only live stream that proves you can spend 2 hours talking about the end of the world and still somehow run out of time. Every Friday at 3 p.m., we gather together to sift through the week's biggest stories, separate the facts from the nonsense, and then discover that the facts are often the nonsense. It's a public service, or at least that's what we keep telling ourselves. Normally, we'd introduce a brilliant guest at this point, but today, apparently, our invitation got the same treatment as a guy holding a fish in his Tinder profile. We got swipe left. So no special guest this week, just the two of us, the three of us, four of us, raw dogging the global news cycle armed with caffeine, questionable optimism, and not enough sleep in my case, and also the vague belief that if we stare into the poly crisis long enough, eventually it'll blink. So settle in. We're aiming for about 2 hours, which means we'll probably need 3 actually, but we'll finish it with a list of stories that we've never got to because the world insists on generating fresh chaos faster than we can make it. Can make sarcastic comments about. Welcome to the shit show once again. It's cheaper than therapy and only slightly less effective.
Nice. Yeah, so we've got David in Paris who's going to join us for a little while. How hot is it there, David? It's still early morning, but
I'm feeling it. It's much hotter than London. I mean, it's not that far, right? London, Paris, but there's definitely a difference. And I was showing the heat of Europe this week, and I think it's for tomorrow, 2 days, Sunday, 2 days forward. And Paris is supposed to be 40 degrees. So and UK is about touching 30. Other parts of Europe is kind of like mid-30s. Paris is like 40 degrees. So definitely a heat dome coming over the city, and I'm feeling it.
Spain and Portugal are going to get slammed, talking mid-40s. Richard, you're saying it's a bit warm over where you are in the UK too, right?
Started heating up yesterday after sort of quite a rainy spell. We're going to get a very hot weekend. I mean, after all, it's midsummer, so it should be nice and warm. But I think we can all agree that it's nice with limits. So
yeah,
we can feel it already, definitely.
Yeah. Well, it's always warm here, isn't it, Joe? And I was saying to Richard, I'm trying to invent a new word to describe that moment just before you know you need to turn the air conditioning on. When your whole body feels it, it's a squishy, horrible, yucky feeling. And Joe, you were talking about it a couple of weeks ago, how you were feeling it, and I'm like, we need a new word. So if anyone's got any inspiration, let me know. All right. So the weather update has been done, and the other thing that I'm paying zero attention to, apart from fan participation, is the World Cup. There's been some interesting shenanigans going on. The Australians, the Scots, and the British have insulted and offended with their language. But yeah, there's some one interesting thing that cropped up today is this coverage of Americans saying how great the food is. No, not Americans, visitors to America saying how great the food is, and then it was revealed that it's actually misinformation because they can't even get this right. One of the guys who was talking about American food actually did it months ago, and it's just been brought up now. But what are your favorite moments so far? Because I think you guys are paying a bit more attention than I am.
I doubt it.
England scoring 3-2.
Who did they play?
Roy Keane's penalty where he deliberately stuttered to try and draw out the keeper and succeeded. So he got to take it again after missing. You'd thought there might be another way of just scoring the first time.
Joe, are you paying attention?
I'm doing something very irregular as far as the World Cup is concerned. I'm catching up with games after the fact. So I'm letting the games play out and then finding out which games were interesting and going back to watch them. I know this is very, very un-soccer-like, but I've been enjoying the work actually. I mean, as in like we saw one game live this morning with our neighbor. So we've actually never hung out with our neighbor before because he's got the free package. We got invited over, and so we watched Korea versus Croatia this morning. South Korea.
I actually think, I mean, I want to add, the hydration breaks are terrible. They really ruin the game. Coming in at half an hour in a 45-minute game, right? It's not halfway in between. It's kind of 2/3 of the way in. And that's the point when you have the tension really building up, because it's coming up to the end of it, and you put in a hydration break, it completely breaks it, ruins the game. And it's not even in there in games which need it. Yeah. So it's
I was reading the FIFA rules for managing heat are much, much looser than all of the other sort of rules with sport, including football. So I don't know, just from that perspective, but like you said, not even the games that need it. The reality is there shouldn't be any major tournaments in the summertime.
No.
Yeah, I think the reason for it is because the Americans wanted ads. So the last time they had the World Cup, they were going to change the rules of the game so that they would have short bursts of play, so that they can put in ads in between them.
Yeah, right.
And
okay, so it's not for the okay, it's not for the welfare of the players then.
No, they wanted more ad time that they can slot in between. And FIFA objected the last time, so what they did is they shrank the game down into little, picture-in-picture corner, and allowed it to go on. But obviously that ruins the whole thing. And this time round, they can use the heat as an excuse.
Yeah, but apparently it's the old regime was much more interested in getting money under the table, whereas this new FIFA is more about getting money just directly over the counter.
Yeah.
Well, sounds like the American government.
Yes, it doesn't stop the money under the table though.
So I'm surprised. I can't even remember the name of the guy whose statue it is. The statue in in DC. Anyway, the Scots put a cone on top of his head. Did you guys see that?
No,
no.
You know,
but
the
I'm not
famous statue.
surprised.
You know, the famous statue of the dude sitting there.
Abraham Lincoln. Abraham
Yeah.
Lincoln.
Yeah, right. Okay. And everyone's like, "What does it mean? What does it mean?" And a Scottish person said, "It means there was a statue and there was a cone within a distance of the statue, so they picked it up and put it on the statue. That's what it means." So I think there's some funny little sort of social interactions. Did you guys come across the Gwynocide story?
Vaguely. She's been criticized quite heavily about some association to Israel.
Yeah.
She was part of an ad, I think, but I'm not sure for what.
Yeah, so it's basically a commercial for 51 Park, and it's a building that is just basically miles from where Palestinians are being killed and displaced. So that's why it's Gwynocide. But seriously, I mean, this woman, she's pretty out of touch, right? Is this the final one? You know, Goop was obviously the big story for a long time, but this seems one. And then, of course, we had UFC on the White House lawns. We had a potential terrorist attack, Donald Trump's 80th birthday. Apparently, Kash Patel was talking about it to the media before he should have been talking about it. And, of course, we had the Michelle Obama slur. I've heard people saying just because we don't approve of UFC, we shouldn't sort of talk out against it because we're going to piss off a huge group of people. And there are huge fans of UWC, you know, we know that. But then I saw Hunter Biden sort of basically saying this, because Joe Rogan told basically everyone to shut up, right? But he was basically saying this is the people's house. It's not a house of kings or emperors. It's the people's house. And that's why it wasn't appropriate. They could have done it anywhere, but it was the fact that they did it in the people's house. But yeah, any takeaways?
Well, I mean, you know, I think this is clearly trying to drum up. It's partisan politics. It's Trump trying to drum up, you know, kind of the popular support base. He does have a midterm election coming up. He did talk about this right at the beginning. You know, he is one thing very true about him is he's always very loyal to give back to his supporters. And so he sets this up as a kind of give back to his supporters in that way too. You know, he pardons the January 6th gang kind of like that, and he says, you know, I'll always be with you in that way. And so I think it's partly him, it's partly, I don't know if you call it kind of like political smartness or whatever it is, because it's a really cheap way to get your votes.
The manosphere appeal, right?
Yeah. Well, just the sense that, you know, I will come and give back what I, you know, to you. You can come to the White House and watch this thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
All right. Richard, Joe, any thoughts?
Well, I'm just going to pop out for a moment and come back in again. I'll see you guys in about 2 minutes.
All right. I'm gonna feature whoever wants to start off. So we've obviously got the Iran peace deal.
Yeah.
Even though technically it's not a peace deal, it's an MOU. A lot of stuff going on. Who wants to give their impressions?
Go on,
very
Richard.
happy to start. You know, I think I've been on the record for a number of times to say that Iran were pretty much exactly where they wanted to be in this conflict, and now they're exactly where they want to be after the conflict. I cannot believe that it's being, you know, displayed as any form of victory or resolution to the conflict, because you've come in and you left the world in a worse state than you were when you started out. Opened the possibility for a country to start levying tolls in international water. I mean, it's just staggering, actually. I think politically it's actually very meaningful in the US, because my sense is that Trump has lost the hardcore that has been with him until now, because they see this for what it is. It's a blatant political gesture trying to drive petrol prices down before driving season starts. And I'm not even sure it's going to succeed in a major way. But you know, it's a horrific deal. And if you're Israel now, you've been hung out to dry, and you're never going to sign up to this, because you are the guys that are going to feel the pain in a very direct way if the Iranians are in any way managing to obfuscate this. So for Israel, this is completely unacceptable. Yeah, I mean, I'm staggered how it's being portrayed as some kind of peace agreement. It's basically, it's a handover to a regime that, by most measures, the whole democratic world saw as oppressive and should have been removed for a variety of very good reasons. And they are now holding all the cards, and they came out exactly where they wanted to be.
Yeah.
I think it's useful to get some, kind of what the agreement actually agree or didn't agree on the table in that way, and compare it to what was before Trump came into office the first time. Because before Trump came into office the first time, as the brilliant video showed at the beginning, there was a deal. There was an agreement in place. It was just done by the other guy, the guy that Trump didn't like. And what that did was an agreement that Iran, my apologies there, Iran will not refine uranium to beyond about 3.6%, which is the level that you need in order to run nuclear power plants, but nowhere near the level that you need in order to create nuclear weapons. And that refinement and the production and all of those things would be inspected by the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is the authority that has for a long time been the civilian authority looking at the proliferation of nuclear materials around the world in that way. So it's contained very firmly within that sort of framework. And there were other things associated that sort of effectively, and I think it also had something in there about the ballistic missiles capability as well. I can't remember now.
No, that wasn't included in the final one.
In the JPOCA. But that was
the original, right?
In the original one.
Yeah, right.
In the original one. And after Trump tore that up unilaterally, the Europeans tried to maintain it. But obviously, the US then imposed, and Europeans kind of tried to maintain it without outright sanctions, and the US kind of imposed blanket sanctions in that way. So Iran had then moved to enriching uranium to about 60-something%, which is still below the 90% level you need for nuclear weapons, but it's a shorter step towards it if they needed it to, and produced, kind of sizable material in that way, as far as people know, in that way. The US had imposed sanctions, frozen assets. Europeans had kind of half followed along with that way in there. And that was more or less the situation before the start of the war, the more recent war. And what this agreement does is it says that Iran will not agree not to produce nuclear weapons, which in some sense it had always agreed to back at the beginning. And it had always maintained that it's not interested in nuclear weapons. So in a sense, there's no change there. It has relieved all the sanctions, which releases about $150 billion of assets available. And it also means that Iran can now freely kind of trade with its oil, which it wasn't able to do before the war. And it has this $300 billion reconstruction fund that somehow is going to be in place. And effectively, that's the toll for using the Strait of Hormuz. essentially is saying if you want to be using the Strait of Hormuz, then you got to help and pay the money up front rather than pay when your vessels go in that way. So what Trump gets out of it is a memorandum of understanding, which is for 60 days. So it's not clear whether there will be a agreement at the end of this. 60 days buys him, where June buys him into August, basically. So he's got that to play around with. And out of this, basically, I don't think they have any of the reassurances they really want. Because the Iranians had always said they were not interested in nuclear weapons, so having a memorandum of understanding that repeats that statement doesn't really do anything.
Yeah.
So
good question. Good question, David. So they had nuclear, uranium at sort of 50-something%. What can you do with that? Because it has to be above 80% to be nuclear grade, right? Nuclear weapons grade. What's the 50% allow?
It's really a question of how long does it take you to go from your store of nuclear material to being able to produce a bomb per se.
Okay.
If that's what you want. But what you can say is that over 60%, you're not doing that just for nuclear energy. You're doing that for some form of leverage.
Right.
And if you want, you can go along and says if you're into the terrorism world, and Iran is a major source of kind of terrorist activities around the world, have a pound of uranium grinded down into your water reservoir in a city, with pretty much telling people is kind of 60% enriched in that way, would pretty much stop everybody from drinking. You don't actually even have to do it. You can just say you've done it, because by the time you come to test it, nobody believes your tests.
Yeah, exactly. Especially today. So there's nothing specific other than that. It's more that you can do with it. Joe, what's your take of the peace conversation?
Well, I mean, it's an ego trip. I mean, for one thing, it's just like, you really don't like what was there before, and you just have to live up to your own brand about deals and stuff like that. It's actually remarkable to hear everybody who was involved with war games and strategy before this. They always knew what was going to happen. What happened was going to happen. They didn't know specifically when each like dynamo or each particular block was going to topple over, but the different levers were always there. So the Strait of Hormuz was always a piece in their war games. They had thought that they will try and get control of that by mining it, and of course the way it was done now has changed. They just use drones instead, and so now instead of making a waterway that isn't accessible to everyone, they get to control the accessibility of it, or at least that's the play that they went for. But all the levers were always there. The risks that were discussed long ago, and it was a reason why that initial deal was seen as a good deal. It was given the circumstances, given the kind of leverage that Iran has geographically, it was a pretty good deal.
Right. So so there's a lot, right, that we're all sort of contributing here. And I 4.5 years between Russia and Ukraine. Russia thought it'd be over in a few days, and here we are 4.5 years later. And Ukraine's just carried out a massive bombing attack. There's oil rain in Moscow. That the Ukrainians are doing what they have to do. They're bringing the war home, which will help, right? And so in this case, it's kind of it's a relief that this in some ways is the best outcome for the world, because the other outcome was potential nuclear bombs. So but the implications of it. So the whole Israel angle to it, Netanyahu's position. What Trump's saying, he's fucking crazy, those sort of statements, right? But it proved to the world that military superiority doesn't work anymore, and Ukraine's doing the same. That energy choke points are leverage, and they can use them anytime. This ignorance and misunderstanding around ideological sort of regimes, right, and how powerful they are and how they work. And Iran would probably, if everyone had just left Iran alone, they'd probably be in a different situation by now, but they didn't. And I think it set Iran back, not pushing it forward. Discussed during it was, will Indonesia try and put tolls on the Straits of Malacca? So Joe and I are near the Straits of Malacca, so basically it's Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, right? And Indonesia came out, I think today or yesterday, and said, no, we're not going to do that. But if you actually look at Indonesia's economy, it's going into free fall. So a decision like this by Indonesia is a definite possibility, especially if Iran decides to do it. There's some. I've just shared a Jeremy Bowen piece from the BBC that sort of really sums up, what did and didn't happen. He's doing some really good stuff. There's another piece in the Atlantic. I'll share it in a minute. Trump does not understand the war he lost. But the thing that I think is sort of missing from the conversation as an observer, right, is it's quite remarkable listening to what's being said and how much bullshit is being said, right? And JD Vance is on his book tour, and he's talking to all sorts of people as well. But I think the attention span of the majority of the world is so short that this constant attack, like in the past, Donald Trump would do things because he was annoyed that people were calling him weak. And I think now he's just decided to put it out of his mind and move forward, and which is a good thing for the rest of us, But I think we're in a really interesting sort of phase now where the story is so extraordinary compared to reality. But I just think as long as everything moves forward and life gets back to normal for the majority of people on the planet, I think everyone's just going to move forward and just forget about it. That's the impression I'm getting at this point.
Well, I think that's the problem. I think that's the danger, and that's the problem, because I'm reading this paper by Sky Kotz and his team about the, I think it's called the economic commitment of climate change. It's about the cost of damage of what is already burnt into the economy in that way. Yeah. And it's a very detailed paper. First came out in 24, had a retraction, came out again in 25. It forms the basis of the damage models, the economic damage models in that way. But what it says is that if you do an analysis based upon temperature variations, precipitation increases, and those sort of things that effectively go along with that, then what is locked in is on average something like an 18% of income loss by 2040, by the end of 2040s in that way. That's basically kind of like 1% a year and so on in terms of your income. And some regions do better because they are less affected, kind of very high altitude, high latitude regions. All of the subtropical, tropical regions are terrible as a result, kind of the Asian economies and all of those things. But what's happening is that people are dismissing that. And this is locked in. Nothing you can do about it. The adaptation efforts you make will only come into effect to change it to make it slightly less worse in the years after 2050, or make it a lot worse in the years after 2050. And the model itself suffers from being unable to really anticipate the really bad things. It's backward looking, projecting out, and those sort of stuff that you have in that way. So what we're living in, I've come to realize, the feeling I've been feeling is tomorrow's going to be worse. But what everyone is feeling is they're feeling the pinch, but they think tomorrow I'm going to get a good year and I'll make it up. And that's exactly what you're saying. After this, it will kind of wash over, and it'll be all right. We'll come back to normal. We'll get back to what it was.
Yeah.
But what this is saying is actually that the impact of just what we started talking about, that extra heat, that dread you feel when you have to turn your air conditioning on, at a time when your air conditioning cost is also increasing and your food cost and everything else is going on, is wearing you down along, and it's not getting better. And because we think we're going to get that relief in the next year and it's going to be okay, we're going to end up getting in a worse and worse situation, psychologically, economically, and in terms of kind of our own livelihoods as a result. So that's what we have for the next 25 years, essentially. And it's quite interesting to actually to see this report, recognize it, and then actually think, when I go out in the street, I'm in Paris, I see my goddaughter. Yesterday we went out for a meal. Cafe is, full and everything. People are talking about this and that, but just behind, underneath that surface is a sense that, you know what, I'm not really going to get that extra bonus this year. It's not going that great, but next year will be okay. And that's the sense that we're constantly living off at the moment. That's probably the most dangerous part of this phase that we're in.
Yeah, and it's like you say, it's like there's this universal acceptance that it's been tough, but it's going to get better again, and it's a concern because we're not developing the resilience we need to get through the time we need, right? Yeah, so
exactly.
I'm 100% with you. Okay, SpaceX IPO. I asked Richard before we came live, did he invest? All right, Richard, you go first.
I did not. It is so far removed from anything I back with capital. It's mind-boggling.
You lose out.
Well, of course I lose out, but you know what? I'm not unhappy about that. It means you will also lose out on a few losses later on, because you look at the actual maths behind this company. It's got revenues of like $20 billion. It's operating deep in red, but it's got one viable business inside it, which is Starlink. And Starlink is not that easy to value, actually, because you have a lot of disruptive properties here that you can make basically traditional fiber optics obsolete, etc. So it has some interesting upside properties. And, if you throw me a number which is in the vicinity of what I can reasonably put down on a pen and paper and say, yeah, I can see it being worth $200, $300, $400 billion just because of Starlink, I would kind of have been okay with that. I probably still wouldn't have invested, but I can see the rationale. Now you're putting 1.8 trillion on that number, and it's like you're out by a factor of so much. It's ludicrous. But it also shows Elon Musk's growing influence, because its inclusion in a lot of these passive indices forces people to buy it. Yeah. Sure, you have a lot of private individuals that effectively think, oh, it's going to pop once it's listed and I can make money. It's not exactly how I've stewarded capital historically, but there is some rationale to that argument. But the big thing is that you kind of know it's going to pop because of the institutions that are forced to buy it, because of the way the general public now invest mostly through passive vehicles. And David has been over that a couple of times and explains it much better than I do. Why, with a certainty, there's going to be a buyer of this product. And therefore I can float into this and make some.
Can we talk about, I don't know if you had a chance to read the Paul Krugman article. Did you have a chance? Yeah.
I read
Can we talk about how this is different to a typical IPO based on, Wall Street just basically changed the rules for this?
Well, that's basically the Musk influence. Normally, or historically, when you have an IPO coming, and there are IPOs daily all over the world, there are dozens, hundreds of them, right? Some are small, some are medium, some are large. This is the largest one the world has ever seen in terms of the capital it attracted. No, sorry, the valuation, not the capital.
The valuation, not the capital.
Yeah, the valuation, not the capital. It's the largest ever. And what Krugman is pointing out, which is very fair, is that historically, for a company to be included in the big indices, which by extension are the ones that are followed by the passive investment vehicles where most of our pensions and everyday savings are sitting, you needed certain criteria fulfilled. You needed to have been listed for a year, and you actually needed to have shown a profit the last 12 months. Otherwise, you would not be eligible for inclusion in S&P 500, which is by far the most important index. I also think, but I will not swear on this, that you needed a certain amount of free float, i.e. a certain amount of the stocks needed to be listed and held by people who will freely trade them, not being locked in by some party. SpaceX did not fulfill any of these three criteria. And it's interesting to note that S&P was actually the only of the major indices that decided not to include it, while all the others did. And that's enough to propel some forced buying from the institutions that are tracking these indices with people's savings. So his influence is definitely showing that you managed to persuade a change of the rules for the sake of ensuring that institutions day one needs to come out en masse and buy this stuff.
No, but I think that's not, I'd say it wasn't Elon Musk that changed it in that. I mean, he played a game. He included XAI, and there are no real AI companies you can buy.
True.
And that's the point. So it's the first big AI company that you can buy. So obviously it gets included in the NASDAQ. NASDAQ is big. S&P holds out because it's still very much a kind of, it still wants to be very much a kind of real economy type index, the S&P 500.
Yeah.
So that goes with what Richard talks about. Think about the real economy is about actually making money as in profits rather than just simply large turnover and hype in that sense and so on. And quite rightly, the S&P 500 refused to kind of just allow them in at this point, but it's going to come in. The profitability is going to be washed out. But most of it is because the desire for having an AI company within your index at this point is something which really is not just Elon Musk, it's every government wants. Everyone's pushing on it. So the SpaceX IPO is really an IPO of XAI. The Starlink situation is the one kind of operating business in some sense that it has along. And there's some big issues with Starlink to do with just the Kessler limit. The limit at which space junk filtering the space starts colliding into each other and knocking each other out. And Starlink has contributed significantly to pushing to that limit, and it's going to contribute significantly to getting beyond that limit. So it's kind of written its own demise into that. So if you're properly going to value it, you think, well, some real hairs in there, because when it collapses, it completely goes. But the valuation is really about this hype on AI.
Yeah. Joe, I'm just looking for the numbers. Joe, what from your perspective, what are you feeling?
I feel that one of the things that goes into value, which people don't often account for, is how well you are bringing the future into the present, right? In terms of, I think, I think somebody, I vaguely remember, and I'm going on 2 hours sleep here. I think it was Peter Drucker who looked back at the, it could have been a different Peter, but someone influential who looked back at the .com and said, and people who said that the .com was overhyped. His perspective was that it was underhyped, right? And I think similarly for some of these technologies as well. So if you're buying something that is actually about the distant future, and you are purchasing that hope, and if you have certainty, I think what Elon and Gang do very well is actually that they bring certainty into the picture. So you have that's your trade-off. You think, okay, there is a possible value there, and then there's a calculation you make based on how certain you think this is going to be. So if we look at it even in short-term, from a short-term perspective, there is certainty even in this group here that this is going to go up, at least in the short term, right? We know that there's a direction there that's built into it. There is a buoyancy to the stock. That's already a significant factor to make the price of it go up in the short term. In the long term, who knows? But when you're trying to buy something in the short term, you're looking for justifications that add value as well. So it's one of the things you're going to add on and go like, okay, they have all these big contracts, they have these big dreams, they have these big plans. I don't quite understand this business, but everyone's talking about it. Government seems to be very much behind it. You know, all arrows point north, right? So in that sense, for me, if I'm looking at it just purely as a trader, which I tend to be, I don't invest as much as I trade. The breeze is blowing very strongly in that particular direction right now. I agree that, you know, it's overvalued in terms of, you know, it doesn't have the revenue that supports what it's supposed to do. But the same can be said to a lesser extent, though, to, you know, like the big companies that are successful these days as well. They're not delivering, they're not profitable to the extent that their share prices are indicating as well. So price, unfortunately, is seldom has little to do with the actual fundamental assessed value. So it's not going to be, the many times when you look at price versus book value, there's going to be a big gap. And sometimes, you know, it's the other way around as well. Sometimes the book value of a company is much higher than its share price. Again, it's just the way the market has settled on this particular thing. The power of the story is actually what drives price. So people are not buying the actual thing; they're buying the thing they think it is.
Yeah,
yeah, I think that's 100% correct, and that's how you create momentum. And momentum is an incredibly powerful short-term investment principle, if you like. But the stronger the momentum is, the bigger the corrections get. That's inevitable.
I mean, the point about the indexing is it changes that in a way, because the point of the indexing is that it doesn't even buy the story. It simply buys because it is there. And that's what most of our investments actually come from. There are far fewer traders who try to trade the short-term price than there are the bulk of the money that is effectively in one form or another indexed. Even when you look at an active manager's portfolio, it may have, you know, a couple of percent, a few hundred basis points of kind of discretionary amount, but the bulk of it is following an index. If you look at, you know, kind of any kind of value portfolio, any, you know, real money portfolio in that way. So most of the money in the world is actually in that indexing. And that means that as long as people feel they have to invest, and they're compelled to invest because you're mandated to, part of your pension, part of your earnings directly goes towards pensions, out of your control because the government's mandated. And even in even in the poorest countries in the world, that's the case, especially for government workers. But they have to contribute to this idea of the pension in that way. That you have this aspect, once it gets out there into a listed element, then it has to be invested in.
And I think that's a point that a lot of people don't understand when it comes to like pensions. Like I wrote in the weekend reads, if you're against it, tell your pension that you don't want to be invested, because there's the other thing. So first of all, you mentioned, I'll just quickly put it up here. We've got 10,000 satellites in space today. It's expected to increase to 100,000 by 2030, and China's all in on that. But currently, SpaceX owns 2/3 of the satellites in space today, and they're already a great risk of collision, right?
We're already at the Tesla limit.
Exactly. But the idea, so he's got 85% in the company. He's the only person that can fire himself. Nobody else can fire him. So should one person like that have so much power, right, from an information perspective, if you think about it, right? So there's that. But then there's the moral perspective. And so, I started my weekend reads with 750, what was it? I'm going to say 1,000 or million. 750,000 dead, 2/3 of them children. And that, of course, is because of his work with USAID. But then we look at what he's been doing with activating the far right movement. We saw it in Belfast, we're seeing it in the UK, we're seeing it in Germany, we're seeing it everywhere, right? The white supremacy sort of push that he is actively leading, publicly leading. There's no denying it, right? So for me, it felt like when there was always talk that he was going to be a trillionaire by the end of this decade. Well, it's 2026 and he's already technically there, right? It feels like such a moral failure from a human perspective that we're at this place with vast inequality, a person with so much power, and a person who is not showing the values that I think a lot of us want to see in the people leading the world in the direction that we're taking. So I don't know.
Well, this is the I don't know what the right term is. This is sort of, I don't know, the irony or the dilemma or whatever it is, right? He's there because we want that money ourselves. So how does SpaceX gets to be $2 trillion is because he lists a small sliver of it. Everybody puts money into that sliver of it. It gets valued up as a result. It's not because it's anything. I wrote a post in LinkedIn, I think, just about how it sort of works. If I create a company today, I can value it to be, say, $100. I can just say that in that way. I create it with £1 that I don't even have to contribute in that way. And then I can go along and I can take 1% of the shares and I can sell it to the three of you. And I would say, look, why don't you give £30 each or £33 each? So we get £100 out of that for 1% of the share, because 1% of the share is now worth 100. 100% of the shares is now worth $10,000. So this company has gone up by that 100 times simply because someone pays what is comparatively for them a small amount. It has completely amplified up the value. This idea that if 1% is worth this, so you imagine 1% of your work today is worth £100, somehow that makes the entire day worth £10,000. That's how our companies are valued. It's on that marginal part. And what's even more crazy about it is that at the closing of the day, if that one tiny fraction of a share, no matter how small, it's say 0.01% of a share or whatever it is of the company, gets traded at £100, that one single one, then the whole company is now worth, whatever that multiple that becomes. So the 10,000 can easily become worth $1 million by the end of the day, just simply because one share traded and marked at that price. That's how you get the valuation of the companies. And as investment managers, we love it. Because all this kind of feeds back to us. It helps us to kind of augment our kind of sense of, superpower, as it were. And it makes your pension look great because your pension is valued off what that one share is going to value it at. And as long as there's money coming in that buys it from that point, because it was trading at that level before, it's not going to come down if nothing happens. So it's going to go up because more money comes in. So that's how you get to these valuations. And that's what it means for me in this situation. I am now, on that scenario that we're talking about, I'm now a millionaire coming out of it. I haven't created $1 million worth of value. I haven't done anything other than created a non-existent company that does nothing. But I've just allowed everyone else to do that. But what I can now do is to sell my share. And Jeff Bezos has been doing this in a trickle, about $1 million at a time, a few $1 million at a time, over decades. And he's kind of accumulated billions in cash out of the money that you contribute. And what Elon Musk has done is done it in blocks. this sort of inside selling type things. He's done it in blocks, $1 billion at the block in that way. And so he's translated this company that's built on that sort of vision, as it were, priced by those marginal trading that happens there, to sell into real money for themselves because of our insistence that we have to keep contributing to our pensions. So they get real money out of it. That's your money that you've been earning. And that's how they get to be the trillionaire. And it's all because we think we have to support it. And our governments are the strongest vehicles that mandate this must be the case. Every government in the world mandates that we have to support the pensions that work in this way.
All right. Okay. So there's a lot to it. But anyway, if you don't want to support Elon Musk being a trillionaire, you can reach out to your pension provider and says, because there are a couple of big pension. I know there's a Danish one that refused to buy it, and there was somebody else somewhere else in Europe that refused to buy it. I don't know if you guys know a bit about that, but global economy, right? So on CNN, Trump says oil prices will drop like a rock. It'll be more like a feather. So I think this is one of those topics that people don't really understand. The ships aren't flowing. Insurance is still a big part of the story. Oil is going to remain high because there's going to be demand for it, because they're going to have to fill up all these strategic reserves, which are going down and almost empty. There's still going to be a lot of competition for oil. So who wants to talk? Because I know, David, you're going to have to go soon, but who wants to sort of talk about, what you're seeing in the next 12 months? I mean, I'm hearing some economists saying this is just disaster territory, and we know it from a climate perspective, but what are you guys saying?
As the least qualified person to speak on this, I feel I should go first.
Awesome.
No, I mean it's about global. It's actually the psychology of an organism. The Earth is one big organism, and it has a certain kind of psychology going on, right? And the problem is all these things like costs and all that, they go up and they do not come down very easily, because we get leveraged up as well. As the costs go up, we are asking for higher wages. We're trying to, the prices at the stores go up. People get used to a higher price and all that stuff there. The prices don't come down. Inflation is the price going up, but it's very hard for a price to come down, because psychologically, from a seller's perspective, you don't want to do that, especially when things begin to get better, because then you are feeling much better about yourself and your price and everything else. So, if you have gotten used, like from a wages perspective, if you've gotten used to the idea of having a $7,000 income, even though you negotiated that during the time when inflation was cutting your salary down, you're not about to say, as the inflation is going down, and let's say you have deflation, you're not going to go back to your boss and say, you know what, we can do 5. So that's the pressure that comes along with that, and it's just psychological. It's just we're very poor at taking steps down. The way our brains tend to work is that we are always trying to get to the next level on the staircase, and we don't want to give that step up once we've got there. And it's very hard to do it because we're not big thinkers. I was thinking about the problem that we have as a in terms of news and in terms of attention. It's not that we've lost attention. I think the world as a whole, if we assess it as an organism, has actually lost IQ points. And
wow.
let me explain. So when I was having a discussion about IQ, when you have a discussion with someone, you have an argument with somebody, and if you want someone to hold different ideas in their head, they need to have a high IQ. If they don't have a high enough IQ, they can't hold the various arguments in their head, the different points of view, and they get lost. And they will, defensively, what they will do is they will filter off and they will try to simplify it. And so what happens, I think the world is so full, it's been bombarded so much by so much information, that the capacity for its memory as an organism cannot support those various ideas at the same time. So it simplifies. It tries to figure out things on a smaller case. So if you think the world's acting like it's acting like it has a lower IQ, I suggest you maybe consider that it is actually because it has a lower IQ currently.
No, it's proven. Yeah. Joe, I can't wait for you to attend my polycrisis workshop, because there's a big section where I talk about exactly what you're talking about. But IQ has officially dropped and has been dropping for a couple of decades, and I think it's speeding up, and AI is going to make it even worse. But who else wants to go next on the economy?
I'd add a few words, and then I have to go. But before that, I want to go back to a couple of points. You mentioned the Strait of Malacca in Indonesia, and 80% of the world's trade goes through ships. A lot of those go through that Strait of Malacca. And the Malaysian ports have some of the biggest ports in the world. Singapore has the world's largest bunker port, but the only one in effect. So important. The bunkering is when a ship gets refueled when it is at sea. So everything basically that you need goes through that Strait of Malacca, which is why Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore has such a strong positioning over that. If you go back, I was going around looking up a bit of history of London and stuff. There was a time when, before there was the Queen at the time, this must have been like the 1800s or thereabout. They built these whole series of hospitals and stuff, and it was financed by fees on ships going through the Thames, on tariffs being paid. So those sort of tow charges to finance things is not at all a surprising thing. The idea of free passage is actually quite modern in comparison. So, we would expect that. And also around the Strait of Malacca, you have this sort of, we mentioned it before, increasing pirate activities that goes on there. So you have all of this trade along, you have increasing kind of sense of hardship along, you're going to get increasing sort of piracy, you're going to get this need of saying we need to police it, let's charge a fee. The old extortionate thing, going to a shop and says, you know what, we'll protect you, pay us. So that's one aspect to keep in mind. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say that I was at the Maritime Week a few months ago, and this is one of the things about the maritime law which people are not aware of sometimes is that it's an international treaty that we've all signed that talks and agrees on free passage, which is why when someone flips the rules or changes the idea and says that we want to go to charging for stuff for passage, it's met with great resistance. So why the maritime industry has not negotiated with Iran for passage, because it doesn't want to give that, because once you negotiate it, you are implying that you actually have the right over it. So fundamentally, that's kind of the stance that we have. It is I'll say it's a complicated minefield or situation. But sorry, David, your other point.
So the other thing is about these satellites. Basically, I think people don't realize, as far as the satellites is concerned, the surface, the space outside the Earth is actually just two-dimensional. It's like being on a sheet of paper, because it's only so deep that you can put the satellite on and it goes around. So it's basically a very thin coating around the atmosphere that you have. You don't go deep out into space. We sort of think, you can go far away. It doesn't. So what happens is, if you imagine a piece of paper and you start putting dots on it, and you now start drawing lines about where they go at random along in that way, then they're going to hit each other. You get enough of those dots on, you will inevitably hit each other, because it is only on a surface. It's not actually in a volume. So that's why when Andrea points out 10,000 to 100,000, now you're just going to crash into each other. And when people send out the satellites, as a company to send out the satellite, they believe they have right of way for their satellites. But if you're a satellite, these satellites don't really have much power or propulsion. They can't really get away from the path they're on, because that's how they can transmit and work the thing that they do. So you're just going to bang into each other. And that's the idea of the castle limit, that you're going to run into that.
Yeah.
So just want to bring those things to clarify that. And then back to what happens, I think, with the oil economy again, in the way that Joe's describing, is that what's going to happen is demand is going to pick up, activity is going to pick up, because it believes the oil flow will be there. It's not the price that slows it down. It's the belief that there wasn't going to be oil coming through. Because when it's the price, I just pass that on. When I can't get the barrel, I can't get the barrel, and I can't turn the crank on the factory. But when it costs me more, I can pass that cost on, which is the thing that Joe talks about there. So the price can stay, it can go up, but as long as the belief that the flow will come, that will drive more demand, more production to come through. And that's the first thing that I think is going to happen, is you're going to get expectations of consumption going up. You can get even greater sort of production drive along with it. And you know, we're going to see the acceleration. And the other side that I think people don't talk about, but I, for one, firmly believe, is that the worse climate change gets, the more our demand for oil and gas will be, and coal. Simply because to turn on the air conditioning, simply because to try and repair the damages, to keep things moving, is the easiest, fastest part, because you can turn it on. So we're going to see that coming on through with the Super El Niño, with those other things. It would just drive it along.
Yeah. I saw a piece, I think it was in Carbon Brief, saying that for the first time, Asia is using more renewable energy than gas, right? And then it was talking about coal is number one and hydropower is number two, but hydropower was only 12% of energy production, so it's below 12%. So it was kind of like good news, but at the same time, coal was 56%. So I wanted to ask, I was reading something, I didn't include it in the reads, but it was basically talking about in the 2008 global financial crisis, basically China sort of shielded the world from the worst impacts of that crisis, just because they kept going and producing and, you know, growing and doing everything that they're doing. And I was reading another article that there's also a shielding this time because China, first of all, was so ready with their own oil reserves, but also because of their sort of massive march towards sustainable energy. Is there something to that either Richard or David you've seen? That China's basically covering up how bad this situation really is?
Yeah, China certainly shielded the world in 2008. It continued that production, it continued its activities. China, over this period, has effectively reduced that dependence on that Middle East oil in some sense. It has diversified its sources in many different ways. And as we mentioned before, it's developing coal to chemical technology. Yeah. Rather than gas in that way, which doesn't really help. You're still burning up coal and all the rest of it, remember. The aspect of China being so brilliant in helping the world renewable energy and stuff is slightly misunderstood. Yes, it's been doing that. Yes, it has. At the time when Richard and I were working, we were looking into kind of environmental patents and those sort of things. China had more of those than every other country together put together. Wow. Which is really interesting. And that was like, you know, back in 2018, even at that point. So that's something to bear in mind, how far ahead they were even then. But it's the property bust in China that has slowed down the demand on the traditional energies. And so it looks like, oh, it's pushing forward in renewables, but it's only done that because it hasn't had the construction that had been propelling all the way along in terms of those property developments and those sort of things. If those pick up, they're going to pick itself up again. China is still massive in coal production, new plants in that way. So yeah, if you only had a glass of, if you only drank wine and you now drink beer, you now drink 50% beer and 50% wine, and the consumption of wine looks like it's gone down, but you could be drinking 3 times as many bottles of each.
So, David, can I ask you something about this China property thing, right? The bubble. At the time when it happened, I was kind of like, China's a pretty well-planned country. And how did they get themselves into this situation? But also, when you were talking about if they start building again, I mean, they're knocking down towers. They've got a shrinking population. It doesn't matter what they're doing, their population's shrinking. So will there be another boom for property growth, or is that over? How did they miscalculate it so badly for a country that seems to sort of get it right?
I'm not sure they miscalculated. I think what happened was that they calculated on a way in which they could actually take the pain of it. You think about what a property bust to the US, 2008, what it did to Europe and those sort of things. So they actually calculated in a way that they could take the pain of it. I think you have to look at it in that way. Sorry.
I think Andrea may be asking about how we got to the pre-bust. Like if you're talking about an economy that's planned, how does it get to the point where it overheats and gets to the point where it's unviable? Because I think again, this thing about the property bubble bursting, people don't realize that the people holding the needle at the time was the Chinese government. They said, we're going to let the air out of this thing as a matter of something that they decided to do. So I mean, I was thinking about the energy question you're talking about as well, and like it's possible. I'm not saying it was an intentional thing, but it's possible. It's all linked together, as in like it could be that they looked at the whole situation and realized that was the problem that was building. It was going to become an unviable situation, and if you didn't take the pain now, it was going to be far worse. And if you look at some of the other energy plays that they had, it kind of fits a story of being strategic. It could very well be a kind of it wasn't the move planned right from the start, but I think it was a move that sort of evolved along the way.
That's definitely that. I would say that to the question directly first, if you want to increase domestic consumption, you build a property bubble. People buying their own property is the fastest way in which you're going to get domestic consumption going up.
Yeah.
But Singapore's been building its property for a very long time, but it's always carefully planned. They'll build the towers. I've got loads of them around where I am, and then they'll build a new hospital. But it's planned.
Yeah, because
it doesn't feel like it's got bubble.
No, because you have a land restriction in Singapore. There's only so much space, and there's 6 million people. China is vast, and there is 1.4 billion people.
Yeah. Well, that's in question now. The population, right?
Exactly, because it's lost its population dividend. Something that India is currently going through, losing its population dividend, and everywhere else. Colombia is seeing a massive collapse in birth rate. That's going to be a real issue, and that's going to be a real issue in all these things. So if you look at what people do, is they push to kind of building affordable housing. It's like the way in which you try to boost that sort of consumption. Because when you get to move in a new place, no matter how small it is, you go and buy things for it.
Yeah.
You start renovating and up buying things for it, and you go on through. So the property has traditionally been that kind of safe investment. My friends call it the safety deposit box. You don't have to live in it. You buy it because you literally buy the safety deposit box in that way. And Asia had seen property collapses. When I was young in Hong Kong, there were properties that never got built, sold on spec, never got built. People lost their
still
shit.
Happening. Yeah, Thailand's full of them.
Things. Yeah. So all of those things are still going to be there, and it doesn't mean that it's not going to pick up again, because when life gets hard and governments want to stimulate the economy, it's very easy to do.
Yeah. I think the last part is absolutely key. Every fast-growing economy, and here we're talking proper fast growth rates, has always seen a property bubble. China was no different than Japan, than South Korea, all these places. They're mostly Asian, but they happen in other parts of the world too. And the reason is super simple. The economy is growing, and policymakers like the feel-good factor of having a fast-growing economy, because guess what? People are generally quite happy. So you're forcing effectively monetary policy to be looser than it should be, because you don't want to lose the feel-good factor. And when you have too loose monetary policy, money gets misallocated. And the most obvious way where money gets misallocated is in property, because borrowing costs are too cheap.
Sorry to interrupt. I have to leave now, so I'm just going to say goodbye. And
right.
thanks very much.
David.
And please
Enjoy
carry
Paris.
on, Richard. You would...
All right. Oh,
no, it's
that's one way to stir up the hornet's nest and then leave.
Always. It's a great strategy, I find. But it's always happened. Yeah, it's always happened. It will continue to happen, because we do, at the end of the day, inhabit a paper currency world where you can freely print more of it.
I suppose just for me, right? Just being in Asia, I mean, I see the chaos in Thailand, and when we were living in Phuket, you could see the we called them the skeletons of past crashes, right? And the forest was already overtaking them. You go into Bangkok, these towers are still there. They've never been finished, and this was like 10, 20 years ago. It was like being in the main town in Nicaragua, and there was this earthquake like 30 years before, and there's like this beautiful cathedral fallen apart, but it's still there. No one's come back and fixed it. It's like that sort of feeling. But for me, just the way China, the way they think, the way they plan, the long-term vision. So I get what you're saying about like bubbles, and that's how it always works. But it's never, that still to me doesn't make any sense how they got there. But
there are other aspects here which are important. At the end of the day, China is a command control economy. Where people are not under any form of political pressure to take short-term decisions, because I'm not going to get voted out, so I can play the long game. On a lot of measures, that enables them to get decisions right and do things with a much longer time horizon than democratic countries cannot do. However, at the bottom of a lot of Chinese reasoning is always the ultimate need for societal stability. And that means there are levels where you don't want to go in terms of unemployment, because the numbers are really huge, right? You talk a country with 10% unemployed, that's hundreds of million people. So there is that tendency that if it's working and you're keeping employment strong, you really don't want to go there and deliberately burst it, because you don't know where you will end up. And I think definitely with regard to property, they kind of saw it coming. And like Joe said, it got to a point where they decided to deflate it before it got really, really painful. But the reason that they allowed it to expand was largely really big picture macro, where they said, you know what, we need to keep this party going until we get to the point where they are now, where you don't have that kind of population growth anymore in working age.
I mean, there's some really, it's really hard to get information out of what's going on from a population perspective. But I mean, just think of the environmental contribution of all of those places that have been built and never occupied, right? I mean,
carbon embedded in these structures is enormous, right?
I know. And, like I used to be standing on the beach in Phuket watching these mega constructions happening. And I've got this map of future sea level rise. And I'm like, I don't even think this will be finished before people move into it when the sea is at the front door. But we've got to suffer the emissions of its creation, because the people behind it, they're taking the money. This one in particular, massive Chinese investment, and they've taken all the money up front, or a percentage of it, and a lot of people run away with that money before the keys are handed over. That's a common thing. All right, I want to move on to, there's been some pretty interesting stuff going on in the tech space, and one of the publications I subscribe to is Wired, because I can get the tech sort of stories. But there was a story: leak exposes members of Peter Thiel's secretive Dialogue Society. And so basically outside of Dublin from August 12th to 16th, I think they obviously they're going to have to move this event. Somebody got in and hacked the system. So they basically found all the members, and they also found the agenda. And so here you go. Here's some of the agenda items: navigating World War III and battlefield technologies. Bring back nuclear. So obviously that's going to be the big focus. Money does in brackets buy happiness, which is a conversation that the only people who ever have are people with money. Another one is build a cult. And I said build a cult with an L. Build a party. How's your sex life? And the Ulysses Book Club. And you can tick a box and say, I am looking for love. Some of the other themes are AI reordering society, work, war, domestic terrorism targeting data centers, religious revival, and psychedelic inquiry into the nature of reality. So that's what they're going to be gathering to discuss. So it's obviously Peter Thiel and a whole bunch of other tech bros, or the Nerd Reich. US government, so Scott Bessent, Dan Driscoll, who's the Army Secretary, Ted Cruz. Then they've got tax finance executives, so the PayPal mafia, and various founders of surveillance and data brokerage firms. So we've talked about the network state. And if you're paying attention, they're talking about this stuff all the time in public. They're not keeping it quiet. But anytime anyone talks about it, it sounds like a conspiracy theory. So all those free trade zones that are being sort of done in the UK, you've got some islands. There's one off Guatemala. A lot of the talk around Greenland is for one of the network states. So the network state idea is the leader of the network state, the city or the community, is a CEO. So there's no democracy. It's all crypto-based. You can apply to join one of these societies. They're already online. You can just put your name in. And if you're considered an acceptable member of this society, you can be accepted. So you can go and buy one of the properties in this network state when they build them. But I think they're underestimating the opportunity to build these cities in places. And they've got an island off Singapore. That's Bala Srinivasan, who was talking about that at a network state event in Singapore recently. So it's just off Singapore, but it's owned by Indonesia. Greenland is one. Like I said, there's one off Guatemala. There's also one they're talking around South Africa. So they're sort of going, they're looking at it around the world, which I think is a good idea, because if you want to prepare for World War III, you want to, the billionaire bunkers, they're all down in New Zealand, right? So yeah, but it's a pretty interesting chapter. But there's a guy who's written he's about to publish a book called The Nerd Reich, and his website is called Nerd Reich, and his name is Gil Duran, and he's been talking about this for ages, and he's the person that helped me make sense of how Donald Trump won their last election. So I recommend The Nerd Reich. Here's the article. But yeah, did either of you have a chance to have a look?
Well, I didn't read the article, but I've got to confess, the conference sounds like my kind of thing.
Oh, yeah, it'd be fascinating. It would be. I was just thinking. So, Richard?
No, this is one I didn't read in full. I scrolled through it. It sits very much in the wave we're seeing around the world, with what should we call it? It's an extreme form of libertarianism. That is, it's taking a whole new expression, which actually is quite far removed from my own strong brand of libertarianism, because I'm definitely libertarian at heart. But this is a different expression that I'd like to say it's been heavily corrupted along the way, very much like capitalism has. But you see strands of it happening everywhere. This new country, Liberland in in Croatia being created, etc., where
Yeah.
you basically vet the new citizens. I'm kind of agnostic on the whole development of all these quite extreme forms of corrupted libertarianism. Just like I ultimately think it ties very well into the extreme concentration of wealth we've seen in the tech space among, let's call them, a few founders of companies.
Yeah.
Because I ultimately think the system is kind of self-regulating. You are back to many places in the world with Gini coefficients that historically has created the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution. I actually don't think this will be any different. When you get those extreme measures of disparity in wealth, and importantly, the lower bracket actually struggles to survive, then you get societal change. You can get away with the difference and the disparity in extreme wealth as long as the lower tier are kind of okay. And I think we're heading straight into a situation where they are not, very much like Russia 1917 or France 1789.
Yeah. But we better get moving. So I think we have a failure of imagination. A massive global failure of imagination, and we've had it as a topic on one of our shows. I think, Joe, it was still the No Show back then. So these guys base a lot of their stories on sci-fi and fantasy. So I'm a fantasy head. I grew up with fantasy, so when they speak in language, it's language I get, right? One of the things that we miss, and Joe, you were talking about the short-term thinking. So first of all, they dilute the information sphere with their information solutions, right? So they're creating the problem. But also, if you actually listen to a lot of what they're saying, while they're speaking like they're long-term thinkers, I actually find a lot of the people, especially the dark triad types, they're very, very short-term thinking. And it's actually, it's a quality of the dark triad is short-term thinking, even though they sound like, when Teal's talking about the Antichrist and stuff, their whole message is about leaving democracy because democracy doesn't work. And if you actually read Goliath by Luke Kemp, democracy is actually the natural state of humanity. It is the natural state and always has been, which I think is a really interesting insight. So when people are saying democracy is failing, it's been forced to fail. If you undermine everything, you undermine trust in information, you undermine trust in institutions. There's people benefiting from that. It's not the majority of us. But there's another really important point here that I think people are missing. There is a eugenicist strategy underneath all of this. So the world, the conversation around climate, there's a lot of people focused on population. The bit that they always miss is half the world's population live in balance with nature.
Mm-hmm.
They will destroy that half. They don't. There is a sacrifice that they are willing to make, and it sounds like a conspiracy theory. But if you actually and I've been paying attention to it for years, there's a eugenicist message underneath, and they don't care about the majority of people. They're preparing for Armageddon. They're talking about it, right? And every single one of us is indispensable. So all of their soldiers out there fighting on the street, protesting on the street, burning homes because a brown or a black person lives inside it, and this should be white people, are contributing to their own downfall. And it's something it's so clear to me, and I have no failure of imagination. What we do have is a failure of courage to speak up about it. There are people speaking up about it, but not enough. And we're not acting collectively. We're not acting in our own interest. But I want to move on to less sounding conspiracy stuff. But Joe, I want to hand it over to you. So there's a lot going on with Anthropic, with Fable and Mythos, which has a huge ramifications. But so first of all, what happened? But then there's the other side of it is they've put forward the paperwork to go through IPO. I mean, this isn't a good thing to happen to them, is it?
Oh no, definitely not good news when your 2-star models that you've just put out has been shackled by the U.S. government. I mean, but it also is tremendous marketing, because right now everybody who uses AI on the leading edge really wants to have Fable and really wants to have Mythos, right? Because when you log in, if you're a regular user of Claude, the first thing you see on top of it, it just tells you that these two services are not available.
Yeah.
And that creates that further demand as well. But what I think is interesting is the reason behind what was happening, which we had just initially thought, and I think the initial reaction was that it was a security concern because of the model itself. It was actually related to how the data being handled through the model and the kind of data that was going to be exposed to it. That's the kind of thing that they were more concerned about. But still, nonetheless, it was a security thing. Is it bad news? Yeah, it's kind of bad news. But if you ask me about what is the more robust story and why I think Anthropic is going to win even more because of this, is that you want to have the bumps along the way, and you want to be alongside the. If AI is going to become ubiquitous and it's going to be this great thing, I think Anthropic is telling a much better story, in the sense that they're telling both sides of things. They're not, and one of the things that typifies an Anthropic launch of any new model is that they'll tell you, first of all, how bad it is or how dangerous it is, right? And that's kind of part of the pattern that they've been following of late. And I'm not going to say it's insincere, but I think it's the tech world's equivalent of being more authentic. I think there's a feeling like, if you think about it right now, for instance, when you and this is my own experience of this, I use ChatGPT when I'm using the McDonald's version of it. Well, even though I'll say that ChatGPT does certain things really much better than Claude. When it comes to things, language stuff, when it comes to things like to do with like the intro to our show, for instance, I'll get the help of ChatGPT because it does a far better job. It's more hip, if you like. But when it comes to doing the serious stuff, I'm much more inclined to go towards what Anthropic offers, and that's partly to do with this branding that they've created for themselves. Where Anthropic's about the serious stuff, we're philosophizing about the future, and I think what they're doing with their funds, for instance, they're putting aside money, to address the problems that AI will create, and they say that AI will create. I think is another part of this behavior as well. I mean, my hope is that Anthropic is that company that's going to be able to push the frontiers of AI and help those along the way that it can't, that it's gonna suffer. I think in the process of it being implemented as well. So, is it good news? Is it bad news that they've been restricted? I think it's actually, for the long-term story, it's amazing news, because it's a hurdle to be overcome. And let's say they overcome the hurdle internally. If they work out how they can make this software safe. Actually, the thing is, again, like the perception that we all had immediately was that the software wasn't safe. It was actually how it was going to be used that there was an issue with, and so they want to make sure that they address those problems. But that perception is going to be really good for the brand. It's like it's like Mercedes-Benz going like, we're going to have to not sell this car because it turns out it's too powerful and too good.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's a good way of doing it. So, Dr. Tim Frey sort of dropped on LinkedIn the other day. I don't know if you saw his question. He thinks it's interesting. So, for years, most AI conversations focused on model quality, capabilities, and benchmarks. Now we're starting to see a different question emerge. What happens when access to a critical AI capability changes overnight? And I met people who were coders who had it chopped off at their knees, right? And that's why sovereign AI is gaining so much momentum. It's not only about privacy or regulation anymore, it's about operational resilience and maintaining control over business-critical AI workflows. So someone like me, I have to be on somebody else's platform. I'm not going to have a proprietary base. Can you recommend any sort of open source sort of platforms where we could start moving towards our own? He's recommending, let me get down to it, but what are your thoughts, Joe?
I don't know enough to give you the specific names, but I know that you can actually have you can run your own large language models at home on very small devices. So I don't know whether you saw the video of Vivin Balakrishnan speaking at an AI event, and he was talking about the ethical aspect of trying to regulate or govern AI. And if you don't know enough about it, how can you have the right to do it? So what he did on his own time, in his own as a project for himself, is that he built his own foreign ministry AI at home on a Raspberry Pi.
Right, right, yeah.
And I think that does two things you should think about in terms of how to use AI as well. You don't need to bring out the sledgehammer to knock down every nail in the house. And I think what happens is people tend to think very much about getting the biggest, boldest, strongest AI because they want to do everything that one way. I think what you can do is you can kind of build these smaller ones or smaller things that can actually satisfy quite a lot of it, because AI is it's a pattern of accessing information, and what you can do is you can retrain it from time to time. But for the most part, a more basic AI is going to serve the needs of most people most times. It's only if you are doing the higher end stuff that you want to go and get something like Claude Pro or Claude Max, for instance, where you'll need to really, and when you talk about it as well, it's not really that much money to get that kind of power, right? Even the max plan is like $200 a month. And for the kind of firepower that you're getting access to, it's really quite amazing. But most people don't need it. I even look at Pro and I go like, I don't really need it. And what I do is actually, to be honest, I have one or two services that I pay for, but I do have several free services, so that Claude, sometimes because I use Claude through another service, they put caps on it. And it says you can't do this, and it seems to be this low power thing. And I go like, okay, I'll take this task, and I'll go over to DeepSeek, which does it for free. And this task that Claude, with all the caps, can't do, I can do for free on DeepSeek. So I kind of mix and match and use. I like the cheap stuff, so I like to try and make that work for me.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to put Richard in the spotlight, give you a break. So just from an IPO perspective, because it was Amazon's CEO apparently reached out to the White House. Amazon's heavily invested in Claude, so not Claude, in Anthropic, and so the IPO's coming up. They've already put their name down. So what are those ramifications? Because in some ways it kind of feels like, Musk and SpaceX are where they are because of government, right? Government contracts, all that sort of stuff. But it feels like every step Anthropic takes, the government's not on their side. And it started with that sort of big fight about using their technology in the Iran war. So it sounds like there's a bit of a government issue.
Yeah, I'm sure these are kind of at very high level, the various spheres colliding, over who wields the most influence and who is prepared to be the nastiest effectively in pushing their own agenda. What I do notice, and we kind of touched on this in a couple of shows back, is, and this is obviously the great cynic in me speaking, which I'm always very happy to abide to. When you come to a real saturation point, and I think we are at the saturation point in terms of how much valuation has been sucked into the space out of other sectors in the stock market. Everyone involved in the space has a strong self-interest to keep the party going. So when you see Amazon and you see Oracle and you see everyone involved, what's happening now is a amplification and broadening of ownership and interest for everyone involved in the space. You need this to keep going because we are so heavily invested in the story that everyone, even when you are in conflict with each other over certain pies to be allocated, ultimately realizes that it's much more important to keep the size of the pie than our share of it, because ultimately it's the absolute amount that is of most important to us and our stakeholders. And the analogy I always come up with is very much the late 80s in Japan and the absolutely insane valuations of property that happened in Tokyo in 88, 89. And everyone was fully invested to ensure the party kept going. Even people who came from very different and almost like sworn enemies in business sense, all were prepared to do business with each other to keep the party going, because we are so heavily invested in the whole space. The worst thing that can happen is that we get the deflation, and the longer you keep that party going, the costlier the bubble pop gets. And we're seeing it all the time now in the private equity space, where the buyers for any floats have dried up massively. So instead, private equity companies are buying and selling for each other at what I perceive is very heavily inflated prices, because we need to keep these valuations and this party going.
But they all know they won't be able to achieve that. That's not a reality, right?
No, but as long as we keep it going and the valuations stick, everyone has the self-belief that they are ultimately the best at trading themselves out of this position ahead of the others. That's everyone's belief, trust me.
Yeah, I think the good example really is like Jeff Bezos versus Elon Musk, right? In terms of how they've liquidated the position. Like Bezos has liquidated and basically has been quietly getting off the Titanic, whereas what Elon's doing is going, we can build a bigger Titanic, right? So I mean that's the different strategy, and it's I do think people do miss the fact that we are all driven on vaporware, economies, governments, personal relationships, families. We're all driven on an idea that is not, if fundamentally we were to examine it, is a story, right? So we are usually just comparing the quality of the stories, and usually what we're doing is we are saying we believe this thing more than we believe the other thing, and for whatever reason we go like, therefore that is more valuable, that's more stable. I mean, that's kind of, it's not a nihilistic perspective on things, but for me, I sometimes take a step back and go like, we need to think about that. And what I do is I play with that. I try to do something with that. I go like, okay, well, knowing what I know about this, what can I do with that to help my family and do things for the better side? If my better side actually is the better side, I don't know. But, that's something that we can't really tell. It's like, with when you look at Warren Buffett, right, and you're talking about things like the investments that he's been making over the long term and how he approaches things. If you look at his investment, perhaps in See's Candies, for instance, right, that seems like a long-term, fundamental, great investment, and it's in a category that should be fine. But what happens when the world goes like, sugar is bad, and See's Candy maybe is fundamentally about really good candy made from sugar, right? The economy can move and change and shift, and then is he then in a good investment? Is it just an investment, in terms of the financial value of it? After all, it's all it is really. It's a wheel that keeps on turning, right? All business is simply that. It's the churn of customers buying something from you or getting a service from you, and you continuing to provide something or to upsell them and give them better value. It just goes round and round.
Yeah.
Joe, don't disagree.
Yeah, I'm going to put us up and just say if anyone wants to preach, I'll put you back in the spotlight. But you know, yeah, I'm 100% with you, right? And but the problem is, we can see the story and know that the story isn't sustainable. And when I use the word sustainable, I mean it in every way, right? Mm-hmm. And we live in a world where there are people like us who look at the story and go, well, what's it going to take? And I was watching a video the other day of the collapse of the Mayan civilization. So history, archaeology is one of my passions, right? Ancient history, and it was like what's happening today. They kept going while knowing, they kept going, doing the same things that was going to destroy their civilization until they did. It collapsed, right? Mm-hmm. And all throughout human history, and that's the Goliath's. I can't remember Luke Kemp's book, right? It goes back to the beginning of human society and moves forward. And it just talks about this human ability. But there's different times where there's different types of leadership that are good for societies to move forward. They recognize the problem. There's a fantastic example in Chile where it was a climate change story. They were down by the ocean. They moved up a mountain. There's no walls around the city. There's no violence. They kept their instruments. They kept their art, right? Whereas other places, it was basically total destruction, war, societal breakdown, all that sort of stuff. So we sit here and we look at it, and you listen to the stories, and you listen to the bullshit, and I'm like, why can't other people see what I'm seeing? And then a lot of people who think like that think, well, maybe I'm wrong, or they disappear. They disappear out of society. They withdraw. They basically become hermits. There's a lot of that going on as well, because what's the point, right? But it's so obvious all the different paths we're on. It's the short-term thinking we were talking about before. It's like it's so obvious where this is. I mean, going from 10,000 satellites in space to 100,000 within the next 4 years. It's not physically possible for us to do that. It's not physically possible. So why is that on the agenda? And China's going to contribute a lot of new satellites, which fair enough.
Yeah, I mean, some of these things, some of these ideas that people say are impossible. That's the thing for me that I've been grappling with as well, right? Because you think about how we've looked at the world and said, well, Moore's law was basically the way things. You could look at things and that would be a very, very good way to predict things because it was a law, and it's not, right? It simply isn't that. And this idea about how satellites are arranged, we can say like there's a certain thing, and because sometimes what happens is we can't conceive of something, and so we go like it's just improbable, right? So there's a video, I don't know whether you've seen this before, where there is at the top of the stairs, there's a huge bucket of ping pong balls being released, and your perspective is right in front at the bottom of the stairs where there's a glass, and no ball ever lands in the glass. Right, it's one of those things where we go like, we think therefore that this has to be the case and whatever it is. I was thinking about the space problem, thinking about how much space there is in space, and it seems improbable that there can be that much out there, but we think, okay, well, we're gonna reach that limit, or we're gonna get to the limit, and we can go like, yeah, okay. But there's another kind of thing that we don't think about as well. Say, what if we explore something else? What if we do something else? Yes, the way we deploy our satellites right now, in the current way of deploying them, they're all going to be at this particular distance because it's about the advantages of geostationary satellite positioning. But there are a number of satellites that operate at different levels as well that provide other services. So if someone comes along and says, I'm going to do 100,000 satellites, but they're all going to be not geostationary, but they're all in sync and moving in, maybe slightly lower or slightly higher, whatever it is. Maybe they're out of sync. Maybe they move slower, but they're not geostationary. But I have a network, so there's a handover. I think we could do a lot more. I actually think it could be a real mess out there, and I'm sorry if I'm right one day.
Oh yeah, it's already a mess. No, but you're absolutely right. So the satellites that are already in space are already interfering with our ability to see the stars. There's so much waste out there. Like, you look at the waste on the planet. We've got this waste that's orbiting around the Earth. And one of the satellites, and I know Singapore's leading the way, is these tiny little satellites. So it's not these massive big satellites that we're picturing. And those tiny little satellites, if they put enough of them up there, maybe they'll reflect the sun's rays, and we can address the Earth's energy imbalance, right? Like, because I'm with you, Joe. Like when people, there's so much certainty. People look at everything with so much certainty, and I'm like, there's so much uncertainty. We just have a massive volcano go off, everything changes tomorrow, right? So there's so much uncertainty. They're talking about the San Andreas fault. In fact, all of the faults across that area are at their highest tension, and they've been in I don't know, whenever the last one happened and caused a massive tsunami and went from Japan across to California and all that sort of stuff. So there's no certainty. But what I struggle with is the people who are making the decisions, are they wise? That's what I don't believe.
That's impossible to answer ex ante, right? You can only get that counterfactual evidence afterwards.
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of evidence around us already, Richard. The state of the planet is evidence of leaders' decisions, right? Yeah.
Yes, and that ultimately brings us back to the shape of the democracy we have around us. Who should be allowed to decide to do what? Yeah.
How much power?
And who has the mandate to make decisions on behalf of many others?
Yeah.
And
all right. So
it's really profound questions.
No, they are.
It deserves to be asked. But I certainly don't have an answer. I have some ideas around it. But
But let me give you a classic. So first of all, there was this. Wired also broke another piece, and the title is "Telling Me He's a Piece of Shit." Meta's new AI unit is a total mess, and it's been a massive reorganization. Just yesterday, they fired another 10% of their employee base. Big Singapore layoffs. So there's a lot of stress, and basically what the employees are saying, like I said, telling me he's a piece of shit. It's literally the Gulag. You have zero purpose in life all of a sudden. Most people find the work soul crushing. They feel like draftees, and it goes on. But one of the really interesting pieces that I kind of went, oh, here we go. Creating baby geniuses to thwart the AI threat. And I'll share this in a minute. But basically, Silicon Valley investors and AI leaders, which includes people like Peter Thiel, Sam Altman, Brian Armstrong, Mark Andreessen, these are all the Nerd Reich guys, right? They're funding embryo screening and gene editing technologies, not just to prevent disease, but potentially to increase intelligence and other traits. Their argument is that if super intelligent AI is coming and may eventually surpass human cognition, humanity may need genetically enhanced humans to remain competitive. Now, you read a sentence like that, you're just like, whoa. Basically, so I'm sort of sitting there listening to this, right? And so, we were going to talk about neurodivergent people, and a lot of the people in this group are neurodivergent. A lot of people in the dark triad, they like things like compassion and empathy. That's not one of the qualities they're known to having, right? So if a person or a group of people who are going at things without compassion and empathy, and you're going to get these super thinking humans to manage AI, is intelligence the only thing that we should be measuring? Is intelligence, human intelligence, the only thing we should be looking at, right?
But first of all, how do you measure intelligence?
Yeah. So there's traditional, but there's a lot of different types of intelligence, right?
Absolutely.
So if the people who have no EQ, they're not necessarily going to be looking at super babies with high EQ, because to them it's IQ to battle AI so that AI doesn't become dominant over humanity. So the thing that we're creating means that we're going to have to create something else that is still human, but just so that it's smart enough to manage AI. And so one of the if we change what it means to be inhuman in order to control AI, have we already lost the very thing that we are trying to protect? I think this is a big one.
Yeah, I mean, it's always kind of been there ever since AI arrived, at the point where it became reasonably mainstream. At what point does the machine become more powerful than the brain? And I don't know. I've never felt better about being 60 next year, by the way, because I think most of those worries, I don't have an awful lot of runway left to worry about in that sense. But what I kind of object to here, the way you're describing it, is that we somehow can pre-create infants with super intelligence. I actually think most super intelligence is basically learned. Yeah, you need to have some basic properties, right? So having you
need to be brought up, and you need to be brought up.
Yeah,
in an environment that's conducive to it. Yeah,
exactly. It's mostly the conditioning that enables people to develop on a faster track than myself, I'm sure. Yeah. I think essentially once you come to this life without having suffered any birth defects that will hold you back, oxygen starvation at birth, etc., which are really proper concerns, then effectively it's all about the conditioning that enables you to achieve certain intellect. Yeah, absolutely. Wealth helps greatly here. But having said that, I think wealth is, at a certain point, wealth becomes an obstacle because you stop trying.
No, there's psychological experiments where they took kids with high IQ, the ones from the poorer families, that tracked them over decades. The ones from poorer families didn't excel, but the ones with wealth and support and all those sort of things they did. So the data is pretty conclusive. It doesn't mean a poor person can't, get to the top. But
no, absolutely. I mean, you get the head start in life, right? Because of the network, the connections, and the doors that have been opened for you by others because of that wealth, no doubt. Yeah. But in terms of the pure conditioning of being able to enhance your ability to be, let's call it super intelligence, I think there are impediments if you come from enough wealth, because you don't have that burning desire to improve and fight your way. Very much, I think, like in some sports, I don't think you will ever see, a billionaire boxing champion, because it takes a hell of a beating to get there. You're not prepared to go through that.
Well, maybe if he's part of the manosphere, he can make his billions. but I did ask. So I mean, I asked AI, like, well, what do you think of this, right? It's a really interesting conversation. I should just put it in the weekend reads. But I asked, what do you think of this? And then the next one was, my concern is the idea of intelligence as the only quality of value when there are so many other types of intelligence, musical intelligence, spatial intelligence. There's so many of them. If we change humans only to manage this risk, the chance of creating human monsters without empathy or compassion seems significant. And that the AI, you have identified a critical flaw in the optimization by narrowing the definition of human value to a single metric, computable intelligence. Investors are treating the human mind like a processor rather than a conscious entity. And it goes on, but to me, it's the human monster potential that I think is enormous. And
but it's also on the assumption that if you're talking about selection, you're only selecting for certain aspects of it. I mean, I think if I were running that program, I mean, I'll confess this to hearing it and going like, I find it attractive. I find the idea of making a better person, to create a better person, very attractive. And I think it might be more than just saying, I want to try and create someone who has higher intelligence in certain aspects. I mean, because I think, like, for instance, you look at someone like Da Vinci, that was great intelligence and a strong sense of empathy, a strong sense of the world, right? And I don't think
artistic intelligence.
Yeah, and I think you can't separate all these aspects and say, like, I'm going to hyper focus and just talk about nerd intelligence. I don't think I don't sincerely think that is the absolute desire as well, because I think if what I'm reading about in terms of what the project's about, it's not that they want to create super nerd. What they want to have is an intelligence that can rival a super intelligence, and that's gonna have to be with empathy. Otherwise, there's no point. Because if you create a super intelligence that is empathy-less, then what you do is you create a human ally for the AI.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But do the people who are making the decisions have the wisdom? Because you look at the people who are out there fighting the ethical battles against social media and AI, often the same people that have been on the journey for a really long time, and then they're not making a dent. They're not. But it's an interesting one, right? All right, so I'm looking at the time. So last week we talked a lot about El Nino with Jan, and we went really deep, and it was a big one, and obviously that's well and truly in play. There's a lot going on. There's massive heat waves in Antarctica. Sydney in Australia is having this incredible heat wave. It's June. It should be winter. There's the Asia heat impact and record ocean heat impact and glacial loss and everything came out for 2025. I'll put all these in the weekend reads. One of the titles, Permafrost Shock, an unexpected chain reaction scientists never saw coming is now unfolding. Another one of those things the scientists never saw coming. Food security, big issue. A lot of countries, more than 250 million people right on the cusp of famine. Some really good Super El Nino pieces I'll include. But in the UK, Starmer just announced that they will be banning social media for under 16s, and there will be limitation on screen use on screen time for under 18s. And it's always Australia obviously did it first, and other countries are considering it. And it's always a really, really interesting conversation when this happens. So first of all, you got the kids. There was one young lady saying, what am I going to? Her screen time over the weekend was 9 hours, which I actually thought was quite short. But they said the interviewer said to her, "What are you going to do on the weekend?" And she said, "I'm going to look at a wall." Right, and which is a teenager's reaction to this idea that they're going to lose it. But we looked at walls when we were teenagers, right? And
speak for yourself here.
No, we did. We did. We had periods of boredom.
Yeah, of course.
Significant periods of boredom, and it's not a bad thing. But the generation of the younger generations, they've never been bored because technology's been there, right? So I hope they find their joy in it. But the conversation is parents should be in charge of these decisions. It's like, I can't cope with what comes at me on social media, and I've always done my best to keep an eye on my boys ever since they got on social media. They had to be friends with me. They've been pretty good. Sometimes I'll do things I'm like, that's not appropriate, not for your age. You're a brand ambassador for your school. You shouldn't use words like that. And they're like, oh, okay. But I also talk about what they watch. So the whole manosphere influence, I've been paying attention to if it's infiltrating. But that's because I'm an active presence on social media, whereas the majority of parents aren't. And then the idea that governments are doing this, people are disagreeing with it. But these companies have had, Facebook was 2008, right? Nearly 20 years. They've 20, 30, 20. Yeah.
20.
Yeah. They haven't done what they need to do to keep kids safe.
Yeah, it's very simple, really, and I'm still staggered by the just basic understanding from politicians. Because fundamentally, I think it's wrong to ban. I think this is wrong. The much better legislative way to go is to hold people responsible for content. We've done that for hundreds of years, right?
But they're not, right?
Paper, right? So how did you end up in a situation where someone who is effectively the editor or the responsible publisher is not responsible for the content that's being put out? That's the way you go legislatively, not some arbitrary age limit saying, because you're 15 and a half, you're not allowed to do it. But when you're 16, hey, come on. I just think it's a crazy, idiotic way to look at the problem. We have the tools in place and have had them for decades in how to handle what could be considered harmful, malevolent content. You just make the publisher responsible and you hit them with fines that they're out of business 2 weeks later.
Yeah. But the fines never make an impact on these guys now because they've just got so much money.
Well, then you levy the fines higher. You fine someone 200 billion. It's like it needs to be proportionate to the harm being caused or the libel that you spew out, right? You cannot publish whatever you want in a paper. You cannot.
Well, you can some places.
You can in some places, but you know what? They tend to be quite few and far between. And the same thing, you can't go out and say whatever you want, right? Because you're going to get taken to the courts. And here, all of a sudden, it's totally okay because I'm not the responsible publisher. Someone is using it to use it. It's like that's fundamentally where the flaw sits.
Yeah. And the Trump effect sort of exacerbated it, right? And it's a global thing, and I don't know if I agree with it or not, but they've got to do something because there are kids that get harmed by this. So minority, LGBTQIA plus kids who have social communities online where they can speak and go to. Like they lose those communities, right? But you're listening to the kids from Australia. A lot of them haven't lost anything because the ability to identify yourself, that technology hasn't been really great. But I do think that you were talking about intelligence earlier, Joe. Like it is proven that the generations coming up behind us, behind Gen X, right, and millennials, are not as intelligent because of technology.
There's a chart I saw recently, actually, quite interestingly. It's like the rate of completion of homework has gone up, but the rate of scores and examinations has gone down, right? So they're doing the work but not getting the learning, or the learning is not sticking. And it's part of it's to do with challenge. It's just about the effort, right? You have to push against something for you to get that, so that your muscles get built, and that's something that we're definitely losing. So I'm trying as much as I can in my spheres of influence to get people to use these tools, for instance, right now, to lift heavier weights. Like like for me, I'm not a reader. I'm not the kind of person who actually attacks a lot of reading, but I use the tools in such a way that I can make sense of the brief you give us for this show, right? I mean, for the record, this show, 84 links. 2 of them were to do with the StreamYard and YouTube live stream. The rest were about the stories. And what I did is I used AI in the way that helped me to, first of all, figure out how to look through all the different stories, to kind of turn them into something that's understandable, so that I could actually process the information. So it took me about 2 hours to do my homework for this show, so that I don't sound like a complete idiot, right? Despite the lack of sleep. I mean, that's something that really, if you stretch yourself. So what happens is, I think people tend to take a tool like AI and they approach the same size of problem, and that's just not the way you grow. If you I mean, if you got a new tool, then start doing bigger things. Start challenging yourself to the bigger thing. If you can, it's just like lifting weights, right? I mean, if you develop strength and you're getting stronger, don't keep going back to the same 10-pound weight. Add something else, push yourself further, and then you'll grow. And if you figure out a way to do that, and then you can push forward as well, because all you're doing otherwise is you're just marking time, and you get lazy. So you do get lazy if you're going to do the same thing you did before without doing extra. You're going to get lazy. So what I try to do with my attention, for instance, is I challenge myself, and it's counter ADHD, as in like the people who have what I have, which is a tendency to shift attention around. They keep getting told to reduce the things that you are actually paying attention to. What I do is I try to challenge myself and actually try to divide my tasks into 2 or 3 different kinds of tasks, which require different kinds of attention, which are compatible with each other. So I might have a conversation, I might look at a graphical interface, and I might do something else that seems to actually be occupying the brain in different ways. I mean, it seems like I'm occupying my brain, but I'm occupying the brain in different ways. So I challenge myself that way, and I do things like that, and I find that I'm very happy with the way I get challenged. I feel a strong sense of achievement, because while I'm doing this show, sometimes I pull off big things in the background as well, which is not necessarily the best kind of thing you want to hear from your Grab driver. But I think life is such that you can do a lot more, and if you get a tool, don't do the same thing. Do the more you can.
Yeah, I'm with you. So I want to give everyone some background. So I have a site which is called worldnewsthepolycrisis.com, and it's my news curation site. So every week, so I go back to our last show, and then I move forward, and it's everything I've read, watched, or listened to, even if I don't agree with it. So that's kind of how I put the content there. And because we're operating at speed, I don't have time to whittle it down, right? So you guys get a bunch of links, and then the next day, just before the show, I put content. I'm using AI for the majority of that content now, whereas before I used to go back through and cut and paste, which I think was much harder to manage. So I'm like, give me the why that's explained in this article, because I've already read it, but I'm just getting some content for you. So that's basically how we come up, and it's come up with the script for the show. So just in case you're wondering, but have you guys downloaded this onto your phone as an app yet? The news site?
No,
Okay,
but I
I'll
will.
confess. It's one more thing I haven't done yet. Yeah.
But I have a valid defense. I was actually given my first new phone for 4.5 years. So
well done.
Okay.
I think iOS 15 or whatever, the old operating system, was kind of obsolete. But I like old stuff. I'm familiar with it. But as of last week, I have a new one.
In contrast, I have no defense.
Yeah, stop being naughty. All right. We 84 links. We're never going to get through it all, but we're trying to get through the main things, and less climate focused this week. But I think that's why it's polycrisis focused, and because it's about all of this stuff, because it all comes together and it all amplifies each other, and that's kind of the whole point. But what's keeping you distracted?
Well, the heat.
Yeah. Richard can't sleep because of the heat in the UK.
Yeah, it's
anything else?
No, actually, I have a different thing that's keeping me distracted this time around. I'm going through memory lane, and I've been a very bad boy. No. I've been a very bad boy for many, many decades. Oh. Unlike the other half of the family, I'm not the most structured when it comes to photo albums and pinpointing events. So my loose filing system, which tends to exist of a couple of shoeboxes, is now being filtered through and actually being put together. I think it's about time in life when you get a little bit of law and order to your photographic memories. So, and it's taking a lot of time actually. Yeah, it's unbelievable, and some of these are going back to when I was very, very small. So clearly, the blame should sit with my parents as well.
Yeah, obviously,
but it's great fun, really great fun.
Yeah, I'm the photo organizer in our family. I'm pretty good, but you've got a 60th to organize, so you got to get your photos sorted.
Oh, whoa! It's so far ahead. I can't even see that far ahead.
Joe?
Well, I mean, currently I'm getting a little bit drawn into the World Cup, not in the conventional way, but I'm looking out for ways to spend my time. So in that multi tasking sort of way that I'm doing things, I'm looking for good games to have on in the background while I'm doing my other work as well. So that's part of what's keeping me interested. What I do want to get to, which I know may not be a popular thing to say with you, Andrea, is Jeremy Clarkson's latest season of his Farm series.
Did you hear about his prostate cancer diagnosis?
Well, maybe I was doing too many things at the same time, so I didn't quite catch that. I'm gonna. I know he was.
It comes up in the show, but.
Yeah, it's not on the show, but so in the initial one, there was some kind of a health issue with his heart. Yeah. But I guess that's the next thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I just find him a prick. You know, I do.
Well, there is a way that he's a prick. He's an interesting.
He is.
Prick.
He's totally aware of the fact that he's a prick.
And that's the way it works.
Yeah. But still not happy to hear his news. So it's an aggressive prostate diagnosis. So
oh dear.
I think it'll come up in the show, but I'm not doing a spoiler because it's in the news, not because I've watched the show. Funny movie I would really, really, really recommend is Office Romance. It's #1 on Netflix. Okay. So it's Jennifer Lopez and Brett Goldstein. And Brett Goldstein is obviously the grumpy bastard from Ted Lasso.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
They're really, really good together. It's amazing. But it's got some really, really, really funny things. So one of the things I don't know if you've noticed is, so since sort of the last decade or so with Trump in power, words like shit and fuck are more common in lots and lots of different sort of scenarios. But
even on this podcast.
Yeah. But but see you next Tuesday is not common.
Yes.
And it's become common since Elon Musk became a trillionaire. At the World Cup, the British, Australians, and the Scots are all using it, but it's also explained very beautifully in Office Romance. So it's just a really funny movie. It's it'll be a little bit sort of romancy for you guys in some parts.
Oh dear.
But the humor is really good. And then last
night,
do you
think I have no heart just because I'd be interested in going to a Nerd Reich convention? I would take the Looking for Love box if it was appropriate.
Would you? Yeah, don't do that.
No, if it was,
I'm going to have to come over and kiss your ass. Kick your ass, not kiss your ass. So the other thing that I went to the movies last night with Lex, and I watched Disclosure Day. So have you guys watched it?
No,
heard all about it, but haven't got a chance yet. Yeah,
it's good yarn. Emily Blunt is fantastic. I'm not a fan of the way it finished, but Colin Firth is absolutely spectacular in it. It's a good yarn.
No taken.
I enjoyed it. So yeah, that's how
I hear that it's perfectly timed for right now. It's just the real life did marketing for them, as in I think when the movie was just about to be launched, the White House launched a whole new batch of files on UAPs as well. So it really just the marketing campaign was just serendipitous for them.
Yeah. But that kind of White House release of paper, it wasn't really anything, right?
It's the thing about this is that some of these releases, people are not like that. If you don't know enough about filmmaking, for instance, or how that technology works, you go like, oh, I can't really see that much. It doesn't look like much, right? And I know that it might seem like Spielberg saying it because it's the appropriate thing to say right now, but as someone who's in the film industry, he is really, really amazed at the footage that's coming out, because for him, he recognizes what you can fake and what you can't fake. So he's experiencing it as someone who is in that with that expertise, experiencing it at a far greater level.
There's an interview been circulating about an interview with him that I now that I've seen the movie, I want to go and watch it and understand where he's coming from, because okay, on board what you just said about a lot more being seen in it, but go and watch the movie and see what you think.
I'll go do that. Yeah, I'll go.
Note has been taken.
You know when you watch a movie and you go, this feels like it could be a truth or the truth, or or close to the truth. I didn't feel that.
Yeah,
I suppose. Yeah.
I won't say who it is, but there's someone that you and I both know, Andrea, who has not only seen a UFO, they've been in close proximity to the point where they've actually been surrounded by the bottom of one. I'll tell you off the air who it is.
Okay. I believe that there's other beings in this universe. It's not about a lack of belief.
I see. Okay.
I just didn't feel that the story. When I watched The Day After Tomorrow, even though I knew scientifically it wasn't an accurate representation of the story, I felt that it is. It felt like a story that we could live through. Right. So that's still my favorite disaster movie for that reason. Do you have a favorite disaster movie?
No, not the category I'm all that fond of, actually.
Yeah, but so for me it was a good yarn rather than yeah. Anyway, thanks guys for being here. We haven't had a chatty chat today in that chat, but I've been putting loads and loads of links of everything that we've been talking about so people can stay up to date. But Indeed. We'll see you next week. We're hoping to get a Russian expert on.
We are hoping.
Yeah.
To be revealed later.
Yeah. That would be really good. All right. Great weekend, everyone. Remember to smile.
Always.
Oh yeah. I'll try to keep a note of that.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers.